Thanks a lot, Paddy, for the very nice introduction. Indeed, a pleasure to be with all of you. I can see that there are 150 participants, which is impressive. We are almost, yes, the second part of the marathon of the 23 objectives. And of course, it's not so easy to talk about Objective 12 for a number of reasons. The first one is that probably is not one of the fanciest one. It's, there are like, detention, like access to services, which seems to be the obvious choice when we want to focus on 3 or 4. Secondly, it's drafted in a bit of a strange way. And sorry to say that, but I just want to mention that, fortunately for me, I was, with civil society part of the negotiations. So I know a little bit the history of all the objectives, including Objective 12. But if I were a new reader, I would be puzzled because this objective includes few elements which apparently have nothing to do with the other ones. So it starts by basically saying that there should be transparent, predictable migration procedure for all migrants. So what does it mean? I don't know. Do governments have the ambition to have proper registration of every single migrant? That seemed to be a bit of a dream and not necessarily realistic, apart from having access to various procedures, labor, etc., or student visa. But it's a nice commitment, but it doesn't mean much in practice. Then secondly, you have then maybe something which is more important, is the importance for government to identify vulnerable groups. And probably we are there much closer to the real identity of this objective, is that within migration procedures and among migrants, you have people who have special needs, who have special vulnerabilities, and need to be identified as such. And finally, a third element of this objective is at the very end of the objective is the need to have procedures when you have mixed migration. So when you basically have arrival of a mix of refugees, migrants with vulnerabilities, migrants seeking job opportunities, you need to have procedures in place to do a bit of screening, profiling, and identifying of people who may have very specific needs. My final comment, and I may come back to that, what makes the way it has been drafted confusing is that if we look at the initial draft of the Global Compact, what we call the zero draft, Article 12 is very different. So it means that when it was proposed to them, this initial draft was problematic for a number of governments. So I will come back to that.
Do you just want to dive in a little bit before I will ask I'll ask the next speaker? What from the drafting and I think it's very important for people to understand that you have been really instrumental and in the background when this was drafted, and then sort of seeing it being listed out as a commitment that I think if I can borrow this word, as a lump sum objective, so an objective that tries to solve everything but is actually not very pragmatic. So how would you say in the last couple of years since the compact has been running, implementation is another thing, do you sort of see some governments who have been very pragmatic through your work at ICMC that have tried to take a much more pragmatic way with dealing with this sort of unpacking of this lump sum as they try to implement the priority plans around GCM?
Let's face it, a number of the elements that you have in Objective 12 predates the compact. And a number of governments have been putting in place procedures to identify, for example, victims of trafficking, child-sensitive procedures, gender-sensitive procedures do exist in a number of countries. You have, and that's probably the most important, is that you have such procedures in situation of mixed migration. And UNHCR, many years back in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, developed a document which is called the 10-point strategy, applying in mixed migration situation, where precisely the objective is to not only to make distinction between refugees and migrants, but to identify vulnerable migrants, in particular victims of trafficking, women at risk, children, etc., people with disabilities, etc., and to have in place a system which means that the people in need of special consideration of special needs would basically be identified at the beginning of the process and could be referred to the right institutions, etc., etc. So we are talking at really processes and procedures which predates the Global Compact.
Thank you for that, Stéphane. Maybe we will come back to you sort of in terms of understanding, you know, like you have said, some of these issues obviously do predate GCM, and also to see how, you know, how governments have sort of taken this forward in terms of really articulating it in their priority list. So it would be interesting to hear some country examples as well, in as difficult, or let's say as lump sum as it is, and as an objective, how have countries sort of taken it forward.